Now we're continuing on with our ballot measures discussion with New Mexico. So we've been going through states that passed ballot measures in November 2022 to tell you what has been done to encourage people to try to make change on the local level, because that is where more local, that is actually where more change can come about, right? We don't have super delegates. And this is direct democracy. This isn't the type of democracy that the DNC is referring to, where you have a representative and you hope that they do what they say they're going to do. Direct democracy involves ballot initiatives and ballot measures where you take it straight to the people. Now, in reference to New Mexico, citizens of New Mexico may repeal legislation via veto referendum. New Mexico does not feature the power of initiative. What the legislator places on the ballot through what's called a legislative referred constitutional amendment, aka state legislator initiative, is the only ratification process available to them. Laws are only passed by the government. So New Mexico is different from some of the other states that we've covered. So let's go on here. There are subject restrictions, general appropriation laws, laws providing for the preservation of the public peace, health, or safety, for the payment of the public debt or interest thereon, or the creation or funding of the same, except as in this Constitution otherwise provided, and for the maintenance of the public schools or state institutions and local or special laws. So you can file a veto referendum petition can be filed against any law except for those that I mentioned. So you have to be careful there. Now, number of signatures required. In New Mexico, the number of signatures needed to place a veto referendum on the ballot is equal to 10% of the total number of votes cast in the previous general election. To suspend the law until voters address the veto referendum, signatures equal to 25% of the total number of votes cast in the previous general election are required. Below are the signature requirements that referendum proponents must meet to get their initiatives on the ballot in that year. So distribution requirements, signatures equal to a minimum of 10% of the votes cast at the last general election in each county must be collected from registered voters in each of 3/4 of the state's 33 counties, amounting to a 25 county distribution requirement. This distribution requirement applies to both referendum petitions that suspend the targeted law and those that do not. Who may sign? Those who sign the referendum petition must be qualified electors in the state of New Mexico. Now let's go ahead and get into, because I don't want to read, I don't go through all of this because it can be pretty lengthy. But let's get to the first one. This note here is important. Note, voters placed no veto referendums on the ballot in 2022. Passed. New Mexico Bond Question 1, Senior Citizens Facility Bond Issue, 2022. A yes vote supported authorizing the sale of issuance of over 24 million in bonds for senior citizen facility improvements. This measure passed by 66.33%. So that is interesting there. Unfortunately, I can't make this bigger, so bear with me. The 2022 Capital Projects General Obligation Bond Act authorizes the issuance and sale of senior citizen facility improvement, construction, and equipment acquisition bonds. Shall the state be authorized to issue general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $24,470,000? To make capital expenditures for certain senior citizens facility improvement, construction, and equipment acquisition projects, and provide for a general property tax imposition and levy for the payment of principal of interest on and expenses incurred in connection with the issuance of the bonds and the collection of the tax as permitted by law. So What is the bond fund? Bond question 1 issued almost 24.5 million in bonds to make capital improvements for certain senior citizen facilities across the state. A general obligation bond is a public debt and is paid for through state funds, specifically funds from a statewide property tax in New Mexico. Who supported this? State Representative Christine Chandler. And who opposed it? Apparently no one. In reference to campaign finance money, there was no money spent to support it or to oppose it. So that's a good thing. There's no money spent to support it or oppose it. We're going to cover one more, and then I'm going to finish the rest on Tuesday evening. And that is number 2, New Mexico bond question 2, public libraries bond issue. A yes vote supported authorizing the sale of issuance of over 19 million in bonds for public library improvements. This measure passed by 62.71%. He goes on to say the 2022 Capital Projects General Obligation Bond Act authorizes the issuance and sale of library acquisition bonds. Shall the state be authorized to issue general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $19,260,000 to make capital expenditures for academic, public school, tribunal, and public library resource acquisitions, and provide for a general property tax imposition and levy for the payment of principal of interest on and expenses incurred in connection with the issuance of the bonds and the collection of the tax as permitted by law. What did the bond fund? Bond question 2 issued no more than over 19 million general obligation bonds for library improvements at public libraries, public school libraries, academic libraries, and tribal libraries statewide. A general obligation bond is public debt and is paid for through state funds, specifically funds for a statewide property tax in New Mexico. So who supported this? State Representative Christine Chandler. No one opposed it, and there was no money spent to support this or to oppose it. This is question 3, New Mexico question 3, public education bond issue. A yes vote supported authorizing the sale of issuance of over $215 million in bonds for improvements to higher education, special public schools, and tribal schools. This measure passed by 61.28%. That is huge. That is huge. I don't have time to go into the ballot question, but what you do need to know is that Christine Chandler sponsored the measure package. There was no opposition to this. In reference to campaign finance money that was spent, there was over 300,000 that was spent to support this ballot measure. There was no money spent to oppose it. So, and this is for education. So that's a big one. Then we're going on to question 4, New Mexico Constitutional Amendment, Land Grant Permanent Fund Distribution for Early Childhood Education Amendment. A yes vote supported allocating 1.25% of the 5-year average of year-end market values of the money in Land Grant Permanent Fund to early childhood education and the Public School Permanent Fund, and providing that the allocation would not occur if the average year-end market value for the preceding 5 years of the LGPF fund balance was below 17 billion. This measure passed. That's 70.34%. So that was ratified as a constitutional amendment. Again, because I'm pressed for time, I don't have time to go into all the specifics, but I think you get the gist of it here. Here are some of the people who supported it, mainly Democrats. There's one independent that supported it. And then some of the organizations, Center for Civic Policy, New Mexico Voices for Children, And then there's some of the arguments there. Opposition was State Rep William Scherer. He's a Republican. And campaign finance, there was no money, again, spent to oppose this ballot measure or this constitutional amendment, none at all. But there was over $5 million spent to support it. So that was interesting, considering you did have a representative that did oppose it. And then the final one here is New Mexico Constitutional Amendment 2, authorizing funds for residential services infrastructure amendment. A yes vote supported authorizing the legislator to appropriate state funds for infrastructure that provides services primarily for residential use, such as internet, electricity, natural gas, water, and wastewater, through a majority vote in each chamber. This measure passed by 65.13%. New Mexico was on a roll. Not seeing bad ones already. And then here's a list of supporters here, all Democrats. And there was no opposition. In reference to campaign finance, there was no money spent to support or oppose. And then this one here, New Mexico Constitutional Amendment 3, Appointed Judge Elections Amendment. A yes vote supported this constitutional amendment to provide that an appointed judge shall be up for election at the first general election 1 year after being appointed. This is like the fourth one I've seen from the states in reference to the judge appoint. It's interesting. This passed by 68.79% as a constitutional amendment. So that was ratified. Who supported it? Joseph Cervantes. He's a Democrat. No one opposed it. There was no money spent to support or to oppose. And that is the rest of New Mexico.